Welcome back to Daily Kingdom Growth. I'm Mitchell Beecher, and I'm so glad that you are here. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever wondered just how far God will go to free his people? Well, today we are diving into one of the most dramatic and powerful parts of the Bible, Exodus chapters 9, 10, and 11. But before we get there, let's recap of what we have learned so far. In the last few chapters, God began to demonstrate his unmatched power through the first plagues. Water turned into blood, infestations of the frogs, gnats, and flies, and each plague was a challenge to Egypt's false gods and Pharaoh's hard heart. It's a high-stakes battle of wills. Pharaoh's defiance against God's divine plan to set his people free. Now the plagues intensify, showing us more of God's justice and mercy. So let's jump in. We begin Exodus chapter 9, where God's next move strikes directly at Egypt's economy and health. The fifth plague, a deadly plague, wipes out Egypt's livestock. It's devastating, yet remarkably, not a single animal owned by an Israelite is harmed. Exodus 9, verse 4, "But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt, so that no animal belonging to the Israelites will die." This wasn't just a disaster. It was a clear message of God's protective power over his people. Pharaoh's heart? Still hard. So God sends the sixth plague, boils, painful sores. They break out on every Egyptian and their animals. Even Pharaoh's magicians who tried to keep up with Moses and Aaron are brought to their knees. So let's pause real quick. Just imagine, this scene, you guys have to imagine it. The mighty powerful and the mighty prideful of the time magicians can't even stand before God's power. As Exodus 9:11 says, the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and all the Egyptians. Yet again, Pharaoh refuses to budge. And now, the seventh plague, hail, takes things to a whole new level. Now, I've been through a lot of hailstorms in my life, but picture the worst hailstorms that you've ever seen, then multiply by 10. This storm destroys Egypt's crops, the trees, and any livestock that could be remaining, and the people left outside. But here's the fascinating part. God warns Pharaoh and the Egyptians to take shelter. All right, Exodus 9:19 records this. "Give an order now to bring your livestock and everything you have in the field to a place of shelter, because the hail will fall on every person and animal that has not been brought in and is still out in the field, and they will die." This shows God's justice tempered with mercy, right? He's giving them a chance to respond, to acknowledge his true power, the true God's power, but yet Pharaoh remains stubborn. It's hard not to think about the ways we sometimes cling to our own pride as well, isn't it? So chapter 10, God sends the eighth plague, locusts. These aren't your average garden pests that we have here in the States. They swarm the land, devouring everything left after the hail. The devastation is complete. Pharaoh seems to crack under the pressure and offers a half-hearted compromise. The men can go worship God, but the women and children, you got to stay here. It's like he's saying, okay, God, but on my terms. But let's be real. Partial obedience isn't obedience at all. Sounds real familiar. I know I have been guilty of this on my terms. But again, partial obedience isn't obedience at all. Now comes the ninth plague, darkness. For 3 days, Egypt is plunged into a thick, suffocating darkness. Yet, where the Israelites live, there's light. Exodus 10:23 says, "No one could see anyone else or move about for 3 days, yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived." God's light shines on his people even in the darkest times. Isn't that a reminder for us today? And finally, we arrive at the end of our chapter for today, chapter 11, where God makes a heartbreaking announcement: the death of the firstborn. This will be the 10th and final plague, one that will shatter Pharaoh's resistance and lead to Israel's freedom. Exodus 11, verse 5, "Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh who sits on the throne, to the firstborn son of the female slave who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle will die. Now, this might feel harsh, but it's the culmination of Pharaoh's repeated rejection of God's authority. Yet, even here, God provides a way of escape for those who trust him. And in the next episode, we'll talk about that as we dive into the Passover, a moment that points directly to Jesus as a Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So, what can we take away from these chapters today? Well, first, God's power is unmatched. Second, he offers mercy even in judgment. And third, there's always a choice. We either humble ourselves before him or we harden our hearts. So today, I challenge you to reflect on the areas where you might be resisting God. Surrender them to him and watch his light shine in your life. Hey, if you found this lesson in today's episode impactful, go ahead, hit that like button and share it with a friend who needs some encouragement. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. And for more in-depth Bible studies, visit our website at www.bekingdombuilders.com. Let's keep growing together in Christ. And I'll see you in the next episode.